Chapter 10. "Hey man, sorry about the gnome," said a voice to Willie's left. If it was his neighbor from the basement, he sure had made it upstairs and outside incredibly and embarrassingly fast. Plus, he now wore a shirt and unzipped coat. It's okay, I wasn't, watching you work out, but," explained Palmer, in a way that even he himself didn't believe. "Don't worry. It looked to me like your dog was the one doing the voyeur bit. I seem to get stalked by dogs far more often than I get stalked by baseball managers." "Oh, you know who I am," Willie replied with a sinking fastball in his gut. "Yeah, but don't worry. I'll only tell the National Inquisitor if they pay me really, really well." "What a pal," said Palmer. "Hey, seriously, my dog just got out, and I found him here. Can we keep this, between us?" asked the hopeful manager. "Yeah, I suppose. But if I find you sneaking around here anymore, I may have to alert the proper authorities, like Neil Rubin at the paper." "It's a deal. Come on, Sparky. Let's leave Mr. Hope. Hope's the name. Let's leave Mr. Hope alone." There was an awkward pause as Sparky lifted his leg on the garden gnome, and then a quick flurry of embarrassed apologies as Palmer tried to exit the backyard with absolutely zero semblance of dignity. It clearly wasn't working. So the best the manager could do was just yank his dog by the collar and lurch out of the backyard like Igor from an old Frankenstein movie, or like Quasimodo after Esmeralda saw him watching her on an elliptical, or like a down-on-his-luck baseball manager who didn't even realize that this was the most significant meeting of his career. Chapter 11. At pretty much the same time that Willie Palmer was attempting, and miserably failing, to extricate himself from embarrassment, down south in Yellow Springs, Ohio, Chris Turner was recalling his most embarrassing moment. As a kid, Turner won a contest sponsored by the local IGA supermarket. The prize? The boy won a trip to Disneyland, but at what cost? One of the conditions of the award was that the winners needed to write schmaltzy essays about their likes and dislikes. Instead of writing something about how much he liked his Aunt Jane's Picklemobile, which was the prize his brother won from the IGA the previous year, got tired of, and passed down to him, he decided instead to discuss why he didn't like girls. Except he spelled it wrong throughout the entire 300-word essay. Small newspapers across southern Ohio and even a few news stations in Dayton and Cincinnati picked up the story. Apparently, the younger Turner wrote quite passionately about how he really didn't like grills. Shaking his head all these years later, Chris Turner realized on this cold January night that that very event was the catalyst behind his broadcasting career. And even though it was late, dark, and cold, the middle-aged man grabbed a couple hot dogs from his fridge and stomped out onto his deck. "Actually, I love the things," he chuckled to himself as he fired his ancient gas grill to life. Hot dogs, with mustard only, no ketchup, reminded him of summer and ballparks, two of his most favorite things. Chapter 12. The scene wasn't pretty. A bleak and desolate mud field stretched out as far as Willie Palmer could see. All he had with him was a pair of hip waders and a chalking cart that he knew he'd somehow have to use to line the vast expanse with regulation white baseball field stripes. And oh, the smell. How could a field this empty smell so bad? Now it was coming in quicker gusts of air. His field of vision was getting blurry, and he knew it was going to be even harder chalking the lines with that foul wind blowing, now in shorter and more rapid gusts, right into his face. How was he supposed to finish? Where was he supposed to start? "What the— Sparky, get out of here!" he yelled as he woke up suddenly from his field of dreams and found a disgusting dog panting right in his face. If dogs could smile, and some observant watchers claim they can, then the grin on Sparky was as wide as a Little League strike zone. He trotted out of the bedroom and knew that now, very soon, his master would feed him, and just like a batter who has 3 balls on a starting pitcher in the 7th inning, he also knew somewhere down deep in his doggy medulla oblongata that a walk would soon follow. Sparky couldn't tell you exactly how he understood complex metaphors like that. He probably couldn't even explain what a metaphor was. but he did know that others of his kind hadn't witnessed what he'd witnessed. And he was certain that his four-legged friends weren't all that interested in how the world operates and the overall meaning of life. He knew as well that he hadn't really known or cared about these things for the better part of his life. But now, he knew that he knew things. Thinking was still new to him, and frankly, it hurt a bit. No, not as much as that pain that pounds in his bladder when his owner has an extra innings game and can't let him out to pee, but the pounding in his head made him realize that thinking, albeit strange and fun and new and wonderful, also carried with it a certain amount of consequences. Sparky's biggest problem at the moment, besides food and the walk, was trying to figure out how to slip away from his master long enough to make another mad dash down the block to that guy's house. His game plan for now was to make a big fuss at the beginning of the walk and pull his master toward the magic house. He also thought that if it looked like they were going into the opposite direction, then maybe he could just use passive resistance and become dead weight. If his owner wanted to walk in a different direction, then he'd have to actually drag Sparky along. Sure enough, it didn't take long for his master to come downstairs and scoop up a plastic cup full of dog food and pour it in his bowl. Wait for it. Wait for it. Yes! Sussy! Sparky yelped to himself as Palmer poured some tap water on top of the dry food, as he sometimes did. Oh, this was going to be a red-letter day for the old Sparkmeister. Chapter 13. Doing his best to pretend he was still just an average dog, Sparky gulped down the food, gagged once or twice just to sound realistic, then he sauntered over to the door as if it were a normal day. "Okay, Spark, you ready to run?" asked his owner, who was walking back down the stairs in a gray-on-gray sweatsuit. If you only knew, the dog said to himself, and then wondered how in the world he could be thinking such a thing. He then wondered how he could be wondering, and before he knew it, the four-legged friend was caught up in a logical loop that would defy university scholars to explain. In the end, Sparky just thought to himself, "I think, therefore I ams." Dog food. And he had himself a little chihuahua chuckle. Apparently, Willie hadn't learned his lesson from the previous night, because he opened the door before attaching Sparky the Speedball's leash. The dog shot out the door like a pinch runner attempting to steal third, before the manager could grab for him. Sparky was halfway down the walk and beginning a sharp turn toward the neighbor's house. "Sparky!" Willie called. "Sparky Harwell Palmer! Get your doggy butt back here!" Uh-oh, he's mad, thought the dog, as he raced onward. He never uses my full name unless I've pooped on the floor or eaten his ribs out of the garbage. A little further back, down the block, someone also heard the commotion and thought to himself, "Perfect! The pooch is right on schedule." Second inning, Chapter 14. L. Rick got his start as an investigative reporter exposing corruption in his hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, working for the Monotone newspaper. He ferreted out wrongdoings and miscreants across the Granite State and turned his crusade into a widely popular weekly column. If you appeared under his byline in the Monotone, you knew you were busted. Every 4 years, politicians from across the country descended upon New Hampshire, thinking that they had what it took to be the next president of the United States. And every 4 years, like clockwork, at least one of them found themselves crawling back under the rock from which they came, thanks to an expose by L. Rick. He never used his real name, Lyle Richtofen, because he was a direct descendant of Manfred Albrecht Friar Richtofen, even though virtually no one knew who that was. L. Rick did. Richtofen was the Bloody Red Baron of World War I and Snoopy fame. Make no mistake, Elric was as kind and gentle as they came, mostly. He lent his name to numerous charities across New England, even appearing in an ad with smiling kids and puppy dogs on one occasion. It was his greatest disappointment that 2 years later he had to expose that particular charity for their practice of euthanasia. Of the puppies, not the kids. You see, not all of Bloody Red Baron's genes were recessive in Elric. Most of them, but not all. Elric has a passion that went way beyond obsession for hockey. He was born and bled a Detroit Red Wheels fan. Something deep inside him buzzed when he attended their games when they played at Boston Garden, which they did once or twice a season. Gordy and Stevie, Red Wheels stars past and present, were like revered uncles to him. He knew their career stats like a mathematician knows the quadratic equation or the Pythagorean theorem, but it wasn't just watching hockey that juiced Elric. Playing it was far better. He didn't care where he played, as long as he could suit up and bash someone into the boards. God, he was vicious. Rick Vicious, Sid's bastard brother. All the aggression dwelling in his DNA found a creative outlet out on the ice. As nice as he was to kids and puppies, he was alternatively mean and nasty to 20-something defensemen who happened to make the mistake of deciding to play against him in a pickup game in Nashua, Manchester, Concord, or at the university rink over near the seacoast. Thanks to the national media attention that New Hampshire received during the presidential primaries, Elric's star rose rather quickly. After working in print, he transitioned to cable news, then to international news. A job offer too good to pass up in Detroit lured him to the Motor City. That was fine by him. At least it was cold there. He hated the warmth. Hated it as much as he hated wussy sports like golf or baseball. Besides, that meant he could watch his beloved Red Wheels in person 30 or 40 times a year if he wanted. Chapter 15. It didn't take long for baseball's losingest manager to retrace his steps from last night and sprint to his neighbor's house. It took an even shorter amount of time for him to realize that he had no ready explanation as to why his numbskull dog kept coming back. "Hey," said the neighbor who had the most bemused expression that Willie had seen in a long time. He was kneeling in the driveway, petting Sparky the wonder dog, and even his eyes seemed to be smiling at the manager. They weren't laughing or mocking. They were just lit up like an April sunshine after a long, hard rainfall. "Looks like he's stolen third when he is already safe at home. I don't know much about the arcane rules of baseball, but I'm guessing that's pretty near impossible," said Mr. Hope. "Yeah, but the thing is, now he's not safe whether at home or out in left field. I'm sorry that he keeps doing this," said Palmer. "It's okay. I made him a promise earlier that if he came back today, we'd play some ball." "Go get it, Spark," he said, and flung a baseball that he had sitting with some other stuff on the cement. The dog immediately sprang up and flew into the 2 feet of snow in the backyard, chasing the white ball as if it were painted purple. "Mr. Hope, listen, let me get you a couple tickets to opening day to repay you, kind of as an apology," said Willie. I'm going to get that dog to obedience school and then give him some extra coaching on the side so this never happens again." "Don't worry. It's fine," said the neighbor, who still looked like this was the funniest thing he'd ever experienced. "It's my fault that Sparky keeps coming over here, and as for opening day, I think I'm already going to be there. But if you're serious about repaying me, grab this tape measure and mitt." Sure, what for?" "Walk back into the snow," said Hope. "Go back 60 feet if you don't mind, and I'll show you." It didn't take a wonder dog to explain to Willie what 60 feet meant. All baseball managers know that 60 feet and 6 inches is the distance from the pitcher's mound to the back of home plate. Generally, though, there's green grass between the two and not white snow. Palmer couldn't figure out why Hope was having him mark it off from some random place in his driveway to a random place in his backyard. If his neighbor was planning on building something or doing some digging or even just getting ready to set something up, he'd probably be a little more precise about the matter. Oh well, the least he could do was take the mitt and pace off the required distance. As he trudged through the snow, Sparky finally found the white ball in the white drifts and ran it back to Mr. Hope, who wiped it off several times on his fleece jacket. When the distance on the tape measure stalled out at exactly 60.5 feet, Palmer called back, "Is this okay?" Hope nodded and called back, "Okay, catcher, ready for a little heat?" Now Palmer was on to him. It happens 2 or 3 times a year. People come up and want to play a game of catch just to tell their drinking buddies that they threw a ball around with the former Golden Glove winner. But if it was going to make this guy's day, sure, he'd go through the motions and squat down, even if his butt was hanging just a few inches above the snow. "Okay, Hope, show me what you got," he called back with as much enthusiasm as he could conjure up. Putting his 45-year-old body into the catcher's squat, he gave a semi-enthusiastic smile, put the mitt up to accept the neighbor's fastball. The next moment, the very next split-fingered second, changed his stance on life. It also changed his stance in the snow, because he was no longer hanging his butt over it. He was now spread out, backside down, in the Arctic wilderness of a suburban Detroit backyard, and his catching hand felt like it was on fire. "Sorry," he heard a voice calling out from 60 feet 6 inches away. And if he didn't know better, he thought he caught Sparky laughing at him out of the corner of his eye for the second time that day. Chapter 16. Popular songs are written about the times in our lives when we see the light or have that one shot at glory. The songwriters make the epiphany sound so poetic, or at least rhyme. But all Willie Palmer could muster was a, "Holy shit, what was that?" Hope walked over to Willie, who was slowly getting to his knees and pushing himself up to a proper standing position. When his neighbor offered his hand, the manager grabbed instinctively for it. But remembering at the last second that his hand was throbbing, he jerked it away for fear of any pressure igniting more pain. Hope laughed and grabbed him by the arm. "I guess I put a little too much cayenne on that first pitch, eh? A bit too hot to handle?" It was then that Palmer realized he wasn't holding onto the ball, and in fact, the ball wasn't anywhere around him. When he looked down at his mitt, he saw for the first time a large, rough tear in the webbing. Sparky was at least 30 feet behind him, rummaging in the snow and, finding what he was looking for, bounded back with a snowy white baseball in his mouth. "Why, thank you, Sparky," said Hope, who reached down and patted the backup catcher on his head. Sparky dropped the ball and looked up, expecting another shot at a passed ball. "Hey, where'd you learn to throw like that?" asked the manager, who was having a difficult time managing his thoughts. "That question, Mr. Palmer, is the very essence of why I'm here. But forgive me if I don't answer you with a straightforward explanation. Instead, let me answer you with my own question. Have you seen enough and are ready to put me on the mound, or would you like to see me throw you a curve?" Was all I could think of answering. "Tell you what, get back in position and I'll show you what else I have up my sleeve." With an almost resigned shrug of his shoulders, Willie Palmer shuffled over to his earlier degrading position and watched as Hope hopped back to his frosty pitcher's mound in the middle of his slippery driveway. "This time," Hope called out, "I'm going to slow it down, slow it way down, so you can see what the ball does in flight." It felt like a dream. With that, he went into an abbreviated windup, the kind of thing that a middle-aged man may do to pretend he was playing in the majors, and then he threw his magic. The ball left his fingertips and instantly hooked skyward for the first 25 feet of its trajectory. It then smoothed back down in a corkscrew pattern for the next 25 feet. And then, for the last 10.5 feet, it seemed to jump with afterburners straight across the strike zone of an average 5-foot 10-inch batter and screamed into Palmer's mitt. For an instant, anyway. "Oops, forgot it had a hole in it," yelled Hope, who watched the ball sail back into the snow behind Palmer, only to be chased by an ebullient Sparky. By now, the manager was beginning to gain his wits and yelled out to his dog, "Sparky, here boy, Sparky, bring me the ball." Sparky heard his master and knew with his expanded brain power that his master didn't completely trust that his was a legit baseball. So he took extra care not to get slobber all over it and galloped back to give it to him. "Of course it's real," thought Sparky. "It tastes exactly like a top-grain cowhide with a certain Costa Rican aftertaste." Sparky was beginning to feel uncomfortable with his increased intellect, yet it was comforting as well. He even started to wonder how America's favorite pastime could get away with outsourcing their baseball production to a third-world country and paying their workers just pennies a day. But by this point, he was back at his master's side and dropping the ball, official logo side up, into his hands. Chapter 17. Back in Yellow Springs, Ohio, when Detroit Bengals announcers Chris and Keith Turner were just kids, Keith Turner didn't mind grills. He didn't mind girls either. But since they seemed to mind him as a teen, his summers were filled by building wiffle ball fields with Chris in spare lots around the town. They became pretty sophisticated by the time the boys could drive. One of their fields, in the vacant lot next door, had a one-person dugout, complete with a roof and chicken wire screening to protect its occupant from a sting of a foul wiffle ball. They often told the story about needing an outfield fence for one of their fields. The workers at their local left-wing Antioch College went out on strike and erected wood and wire snow fences to thwart their colleagues from crossing the picket line. Those snow fences looked a lot like the outfield wall at Crosley Field, where their favorite pro team played. For the record, it looked nothing like the outfield wall at Crosley Field, where their favorite pro team played. Flush with teen spirit, or team spirit, the brothers and their cousins drove over to the college late at night. Against their wimpy youngest cousin's protests, 3 of them jumped out of the car, ran over to the fence with wire cutters, and within less than a minute were rolling up a long section and hauling it back to the trunk of their old Sebring. Whenever the announcers were invited to speak at local functions, they'd recount that tale and end it with, "The next morning, we had a perfect outfield fence." They like to add a tag ending to the story by saying, of course it was only 20 feet long, so whenever our left-handed friend came up to bat, we'd have to stop play and drag the fence over to the right field. When the Turner brothers weren't playing wiffle ball games, they were announcing wiffle ball games between their cousins. There are still recordings out there somewhere, made on a first-generation Sony tape deck, with Keith saying, "Here's Scott's first pitch, ball 1. Next pitch, ball 2, etc." Or the action-packed, "Here's Dean's first pitch, ball 1. Next pitch, ball 2, etc." You couldn't have found more riveting commentary in a 3 or 4 block radius. Stars in the making.